Well, good morning, the members and guests of the Cybersecurity Collaborative, to those on the West Coast, and good afternoon to others in the country. We'd like to welcome you to the Cybersecurity Collaborative virtual briefing, Security Metrics in the Boardroom, Management Suite in the Back Office. I'm Tom Sturm, the Vice President of Content and Programs. I'm joined by members of the team, whom I will introduce shortly. Metrics is at the heart of how we describe and manage our cybersecurity programs. It's also the holy grail, always a challenge to develop a program. That's why we have a standing task force at the collaborative that meets every other week. We welcome new members to come in and we collaborate to help each organization improve the security metrics program. Before I introduce my guests, just a few housekeeping points. If you have some questions during the presentation, please enter them in the Q&A. My panelists will try to get to some of them during the presentation, but we'll get to most of them at the end. Our slides are always packed with more information than you can consume in a small meeting like this, but we do that to show that we're creating good content out of our meetings, not simply discussing items over and over again. So these will be available to our members in the portal next week, and to guests who are here who would like them. There'll be an opportunity for you to get them. There'll be an email at the end of this presentation, and you can request copies of these slides. There will be a poll at the end. We encourage you to fill it out. We have a few questions. And just remind everyone, for those with security certifications, this is 1 CPE, and again, you can use the presentation as evidence that you've attended here. So welcome, we really appreciate the time, and we know you're about ready to go on a 4th of July weekend, which we hope will be good for everyone, but please indulge and listen to what we have to say, and certainly respond with some questions. So I'd like to introduce briefly some members of our teams. First, our executive sponsor, who has really been at the initiation of this whole process, Arlen McMillan. He's had a lot of experience in the metrics side, and certainly has provided great guidance as a member of our executive committee. Arlen, do you want to just say a couple things about you and Kirkland and Ellis?
Oh, great. Thank you, Tom. Arlen McMillan, been working in technology and security for over 25 years. And early on in my career, realized the challenge that security and technical folk have with communicating the effectiveness of the programs to business leaders, not only business leaders, but also internally. So how do you measure good, and how do you identify where a program maturity ought to be? These are challenges that I've been wrestling with for a majority of my career. Believe have come up with a couple of good approaches. And with the input from the rest of the task force here, we'll be talking through some of those.
Thanks, Arlen. And again, always appreciate the work and contributions here. I'd like to now introduce Jody Barnes, who's Director of Information Security at Ingevity. Jody has been a relatively new member, but very, very active on a number of our task forces. Has delivered a acceptable use policy that members are really, really appreciating. So Jody, tell us a little bit about Ingevity and your role there.
Oh yeah, thanks, Tom. Again, Jody Barnes. I got over 30 years in technology and have been with Ingevity for about 7 years now. We're based out of Charleston, South Carolina. We're a specialty chemicals company that also includes pavement technologies and biodegradable plastics and activated carbon, and we're global. We have manufacturing facilities across the US, in the UK, and in China, and about 2,300 people, and it's good to be here. Thank you. Good,
glad to have you. I'd like to also introduce Lou Klubenspies, CISO of Revity. Lou has been, again, a very active participant and on the task forces and at these meetings, and we've appreciated what Lou, Revity, formerly PerkinElmer, has contributed to our team. So Lou, maybe just kind of tell us a little bit about you and Revity.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Good day, everybody. As Tom said, I'm Lou Klubenspies. I'm the CISO at Revity. Revity is the result of the recent divestiture of PerkinElmer. We are based in Waltham, Massachusetts. Like my colleagues here, I have some decades in information technology. I'll be closing in on 40 years here pretty soon. My job at Revity spans the globe, so I'm responsible globally for cyber. We operate in 150 different countries. We are about now, after the post-split, about 10,000 people.
Wow, amazing, great. Thanks, Lou. Now let me also introduce Nick Zaneth, Senior Director, Infrastructure and Operations and Cybersecurity at US Able Life. Nick, you've been a great contributor to this team. Certainly, the team in collaboration has been very helpful to you in your presentation to the board, but you've also returned the favor to other members of the team. So anyway, I won't take all your thunder away. Tell us a little bit about US Able Life and your role.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Nick. I work at US Able Life, which is we're an SMB. We have 625 employees, and we insure about 3 million people with dental, disability, life insurance, etc. So we protect critical information, obviously. What's unique about us is that even though our size may be an SMB, we have to uphold really high standards for security and compliance. So a strong metrics program has been key to the organization here, developing one, which is why I joined this task force, is learning how to do this well for our organization and teaching others about what we've done in the journey. So appreciate the opportunity.
Glad you're here. And you're also joined by Vic Wunschel, Information Security Professional at US Able Life. And Vic has been a terrific member on this team, a contributor. And, we're so glad that you could join Nick and your company to help us out.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I work with Nick closely. He presents to the managers and I feed him the good stuff. And we have learned a lot in this journey. It's been my pleasure to contribute what little bit I have. And the topic itself is fascinating. So thank you very much, Tom.
It is fascinating and evolving. And that's the key point. I'm glad to have you here. I'm just going to, for those who aren't familiar with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, just wanted to say a couple of things about it. Our premise here is we have members from industry and government collaborating on all different security challenges. And the premise, and it's actually being fulfilled, is that, all of us have strengths in different areas and needs in others. And by collaborating, those that have a lot of progress in security metrics can help those and bring those up, and those that may have better third-party management processes help others as well. And by doing that, we get a broad base of best practices, and we often take these and turn them into guidance documents as a result. But what does this mean if you're joining and you're here as a CISO or maybe a member of the CISO staff? As a CISO, this is a way for you to really communicate with other CISOs on the challenges that you're having, not only in these task forces, which we're talking about now, but also through an ASPER rapid response process, through our Slack channel, through CISO boardrooms, meetings we get together. We're part of the overall Cyber Risk Alliance, which offers a much broader set of security opportunities as well. And that includes also a 12-week cybersecurity leadership program on improving leadership skills, working on incident management. So there's a lot for the CISO, but there's also quite a bit for the staff, because staffs are always trying to develop their programs, third-party management programs. This is a good way to collaborate with your peers who, again, some may have more advanced third management programs. Some may have questionnaires that they want to share that people can use. So basically, and there's an opportunity also to get your 40 CPEs. We have hundreds of recordings in our library, many resources as well. The one thing I meant to mention for the CISO is we have the daily morning security report. It's like the key report that you see at 6:30 a.m. Eastern on your phone and email. It tells you what sort of key security events have occurred, major breaches, major vulnerabilities, So when you walk into your office or virtually or wherever it might be, you're aware of what's going on. The board member asks you, I just heard about this. You can get on it and say, well, it's not, doesn't affect our environment, or we're looking into it, or it does, and this is how we're reacting to it. So collaboration and a number of tools are what we're all about here. So just to go over the virtual briefing topics, we'll give you a brief background. I want to bring up the security metrics framework, because that is the way in which we are progressing in our security metrics program and also our deliverables. Talk about some of the deliverables of this task force. We'll talk with a panel about some key guidance in setting up a program. And then we're going to just show examples of from our framework, operational metrics, some program metrics, and then some boardroom metrics, which we haven't shown last time. We've kind of advanced all three areas. A summary, and then we'll talk about the task forces that we're having, including an AI working group beginning July 13th, sponsored by a CISO, because this is such a hot topic in terms of governance and so forth. And then we'll show some key content that we have. It's in the presentation. When you get it, you can kind of look through it and have a Q&A. So let me just go through and say these are weekly meetings. They're organizations representing different industries, government agencies, members shared successes, false starts, and challenges. And there's value from collaboration as much as from the deliverables. And just briefly, maybe one or two panelists, just tell the audience a little bit about what our weekly meetings are like, or the value you've gotten from them, and what collaboration has done to help you in your journey for improving security metrics.
I think that for me, it's we have some wonderful collaboration groups in our industry, and this task force, these meetings bring together information security professionals from different areas, different industries, and you get different perspectives and different filters, different ideas. And I think it's important, if you're looking to mature your program, to get input from different industries, because there's definitely some advantages to the approaches that they take.
I think that's something that makes it very unique. Thank you, Jody. Anyone else want to comment before we move on? Yes, Nick.
Thanks, Tom. I would also say that we have different industries, but we also have professionals and programs and boards of directors in different places in their journey towards the maturity in their metrics program. So it's really helpful to learn from people who are further ahead, and also see professionals who are starting something new for their organization. The weekly meetings have really helped me dial in my presentations for the board, and I appreciate the conversations.
Okay, great. The task force deliverables, let me just kind of run through these. We have a best practices guidance document, and it really talks about a framework that I'm going to go over in a few minutes that's governing the way we're doing everything. So it talks a little bit about what is a security metric, what makes it useful to your program, and then how do you address the challenges of building a framework, getting started successfully, et cetera. That's a very detailed and guidance document that we've updated since then. I think it's important for those who haven't seen this to recognize a framework that we're building, and it's been very successful in having us kind of improve and add more metrics and perspectives for our members. And it's a 3-pyramid program where the audiences you're going to share these metrics with, and the representations are how they look. At the lower level, there's control operability. Its purpose is to monitor and improve the performance of security controls, KPIs. You often think of in this area, and we'll show some examples of that. And you can see it's security management, IT business functions, employees. Down at this in a way is in the back office a little bit, to use that analogy. At the middle of the pyramid is the fact that all these operability metrics kind of do reflect the maturity of your security program. It is difficult to take the metrics and then come up with a control maturity process, but we're moving more in that direction, and we want to show you the progress in that. And then that's for the CISOs, senior management and auditors. And then at the higher level, at the board, and we're going to show you some examples of some board slides. We have a 5 deck guide, and we'll show you those. Risk and compliance is sort of their language. So they're not really going to look at all the operability metrics. And we'll talk a little bit about what type of metrics you'd want to use in board level. And again, members here have actually had the opportunity to present the board. But this is what we're building out. And our challenge, of course, is from the bottom up, the bottom feeds to the top, and the top end, in terms of what the board wants goes down in terms of what you want to do. It's a continual process. This model we developed last year, at the end of last year, and it is continuing to serve us well to expand our programs. In terms of the task force deliverables, we have the metrics workbook. I'll get into it. Excuse me a second. The other thing is we've come up with a security boardroom deck, the 5-slide guide, and we're going to go into this, but there are really 5 areas. Oftentimes you only have 15 minutes to present to the board, and we've come up with these 5 areas, and we'll show a few examples of how it would work out for you. So anyway, just to come back to the panel discussion, we've developed a model, and we're expanding that in our discussions and in the content that we're delivering. But let's step back a minute. And what advice would you give the CISOs just in the beginning stages of developing their metrics programs? I know some of the audience are here are more advanced, but there are some here that are just beginning, and that's why they're here. How would you start? Just what would you recommend to members who just want to begin and get something going?
Tom, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think the most important guidance or recommendation is think of this as a story and understand who your audience is and what is it that they're looking to be informed on or learn about, right? So this is, metrics are just a method of communication, and irrelevant of how good your metrics are, if they're not aligned and properly directed to the individual and what they're looking to receive, then they're going to miss the target, right? So that'd be point 1. And then the point 2 would be, as part of that know your audience statement, if you are reporting to senior executives or non-technical individuals, technical metrics are likely not going to be an effective way of communicating to these folks. So all of that goes into know your audience and communicate effectively to the right level.
I think that's very good advice. But what if do you need to build out a whole, like we're going to show a panel of all kinds of metrics. Do you need to have that all thought out and built out before you can show any metrics to an audience, or can you maybe start with a few things and gain some traction? What's your experience?
Yeah, so that's what I call the top down or bottoms up approach, right? If you take if you're doing a bottoms up, and all of us, many of us are engineers by our nature, and we really love that bottoms up approach. We want to have that whole algorithm built out, all of the pieces of that 64, character long algorithm. That's our math. And that's that bottoms up approach. And that takes a long time to build and gather data, because, we show our math. And that often is less effective and is often unnecessary. A top down approach, you can often get there more quickly, may include some subjectivity as opposed to the bottom ups, which is a very objective, math-driven, metrics, numbers-driven, data-driven approach. You take a top-down, it includes some level of subjectivity, but often you can deliver it exceptionally quicker and still deliver a highly effective message.
So in other words, I think that's a very good one. So in other words, not to be intimidated or plan to build this huge model on. I've only actually seen one company do it at the operational level, and they spent millions of dollars doing it. But don't wait to do that. Don't start when you're talking to the board. Maybe bring in KPI or a meter, or as we'll show, a program maturity metric. Even though it might be somewhat subjective, at least it's a grounding way to show, progress in your program, for example.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, good. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, to add to what Arlen said too, right? You probably won't have the luxury of getting that much time to build something out from A to Z before you have to present it to anybody anyway, right?
Right.
And to echo, I mean, you have to know the audience, and what each level of the hierarchy is there to do, right? We've got the operational, managerial, and the board of directors, and they're all there to do different things and want to hear different things, right? The examples Arlen was giving would resonate well with a board of directors because the cyber and tech savvy usually isn't the same as it is at the IT level. Don't obsess about trying to get it all right on the first go either. That likely won't happen. And oftentimes, anyway, the discussion that comes out of giving something subjective will send you in the right direction rather than you trying to guess, the end from the beginning up front. At least it's what I found in my experience.
Right. So let the audience, the questions sort of drive where you're going to begin on that. Yeah.
And again, knowing what they're there to do, right?
Yeah.
So your board of directors isn't there to manage anything. It's there to make sure that your company's management is effective. And so they're gonna get involved when things get material. If you're gonna go in and show them operational metrics, they're gonna glaze over. It's not what they're there to do.
Good point. Thank you, Lou. Anyone else before we move on?
Yeah, I would just say that I reinforce what's been said before. Definitely got to know your audience, but I'll tell you that the most uncomfortable position to be in is if you've never been in front of the board before. If you're new to the company or you have a new board and you don't know what to expect, you don't know your audience, then where do you go? So I think the thing to keep in mind is when you're starting a metrics program is you're initiating a strategy. So when you start to deliver metrics, you're initiating a strategy, and you need to create a high-level plan for that. And what I found was helpful was to start with just a gap assessment. You can base it on the NIST 5 domains. It's fairly palatable for a board. For most boards, identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. Talk about where your maturities are based on what you know. Doesn't cost money. You don't have to bring tools in, and you can show, here's where I feel like we're weak, here's where I feel like we're strong, and then you start to build a business case for whether it's outside support or for tools, technologies to help mature, that program.
That's a good point. And then, as Arlen said, from the top down, that may then drive down what operational metrics you want to do. Let's say your patching cadence is bad. You don't want to throw that in the board right away, but when you start talking about risks and something like that, then maybe they'll understand it, and then you're going to build some metrics around that.
It also gives you the opportunity to agree on what the target is you're trying to hit. Right. When you're laying that program out, I mean, you hear the phrase a lot in security, we're not running a bank. And fine, most of us aren't running a bank, but there's still plenty of controls that we need a decent level of rigor, a decent level of maturity to remain protected. And things like that give you the chance to have those discussions at the senior leadership and board level so that everybody's in alignment and agreement with exactly what you are trying to do when those pen tests and risk assessment results come back. Do you need to address every single thing, or do you know how to weight that risk such that it applies to the business that you're in and is addressing what needs to be addressed? The other thing these people want to see is that you're a good steward of the money that you're spending too, right? So it isn't just, I'm going to go after everything in a report. I'm going to show you this aligns most closely with the risk that is inherent in our business. This is where we need to go first. This is what I'm committing to. This is what will get done.
Excellent. Thank you for the great guidance here. I'm going to walk through the next slides relatively quickly to move on. What this slide is, and this is, we do have this in our guidance document, is just some ways to start if you're looking at operational metrics, how you might put them together. And it is rather detailed and granular in terms of getting traction around them. But this has to be framed by the guidance we've heard from our panelist meeting maybe start at the top of the few things that are key to your board at the CISO level, and then work into these kind of metrics in terms of the operational metrics. But to make them work, you have to have proper data, you have to have validation of the data, and you have to have engagement from the teams that are going to make a difference in the traction and levels of those metrics. So let me just kind of, again, go over what we've put together. It's an Excel workbook. As we said, everything starts in Excel. We'll talk about where we're going with this, but it's a good guide to help members figure out what operational metrics they want to measure. I want to show you how this kind of works in some of the metrics that we're looking at. Again, it's a lot of detail. The slides are here. You can look at them later on. So let me just walk through these quickly. Here, it's a dashboard of 40 operational metrics aligned in this CSF. They're not one-to-one aligned all the time, but you can kind of go left or right and see the types of metrics that fall into identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And you can see the domains: asset management, risk management, vulnerability management, audit and compliance, supply chain management, endpoint like EDR, data protections, access management, human resource security, applications, configuration management, including in the cloud, and then incident management and threats on the bottom. So it's very, very comprehensive. The format that we use here is basically metrics, description, and purpose at the top. So when you click on one of those items, data and calculations, you actually can put data in the bottom here, and the graphs will change. Typically what happens is you're going to look at this, say, maybe I want to measure something differently. Maybe I have a different asset base, but you can use this. And the last thing too, and again, this is in the back office, so you're going to be dealing with your IT folks, the server groups, and so forth. You can have a status and tracking measurements here. This has worked very effectively. Again, it's not something you would show at the board level, but it's something that informs what you're doing for the board. And just to quickly go through a couple of examples, here's an example of a risk assessment overview. So you might be doing an annual or an enterprise test and so forth. You want to know, for example, are we accepting risks? Are we treating them? Is there an outstanding number of risks that have been undecided? And then you can also look at the remediation efforts. Are we remediating within SLAs? Are we getting a lot of critical? So you can kind of see how fast you're dealing with your overall risk assessments. And we also have that in the vulnerability level as well, but this being a full risk assessment. Here's an example of an operational metrics. Another example is privileged access accounts. How many privileged users do we have? How many accounts do we have per user? In this example, we find out we have a lot of accounts and they're growing. And then we can look at a secondary graph, which kind of informs and breaks down the first one. Do we have a lot of overprivileged or inactive accounts? And that, by tracking this, we can then work as teams to kind of improve these metrics. Another thing you might want to look at is privileged accounts with multi-factor authentication. We have another example of that in our workbook. And lastly, one of the things you don't want to forget about is cloud misconfigurations. We're all in the cloud. There are tools that check your configurations, and some of these are ongoing. So here's an example of measuring the degree of criticality of those misconfigurations and whether or not remediating within certain SLAs. This is not telling a great story here for this company. It says things are getting a little worse. But by looking at it, you would then put resource on it and try to improve and lower your risk in this area. But we have examples here in this workbook, and it's available to our members and new members coming in. So where we're going to go with this is we're going to focus on identifying data sources to create metrics. One of the challenges, and I think members here on the panel will agree, for all these operational metrics, data sources come from scanning tools and different places. So what we want to do is help members identify where they would get these tools and how those tools could be integrated into a system. The second thing is we want to move these into a tool that will help us do that, for members to use and access. They may be putting some of their data anonymously, so we can create benchmarks. We would keep it anonymous, but give members more of an interactive tool to work with. So that's kind of where we're going with the backroom metrics. I'm going to move along here, and then we'll get back into discussion on boardroom metrics. The middle level of our framework is all about the management suite. And it's about the maturity of your program. And we do, in this particular workbook, have a maturity model. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and maybe get members discussing the issues with measured maturity. But we do have in this CSF framework, we look at various aspects of maturity, whether the control is in place or it's initial, and then we look at elements of its design. Is it documented? Are the roles and responsibilities defined? Is it operable? Is it managed and measured? Do you have some metrics with it? Are you looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of this control and improving it? That's one piece. The second piece over here to the right is, as we say, it's great you have a control, but I know when I was in a large organization in mergers, we only had visibility into half the assets that the control was supposed to manage. So you might have a great control, but if it's only relevant to a certain, or applied to a certain percent of assets, it's not totally effective. So we do look at sort of coverage on the assets, and we ask that question. And then what we do is we produce a little graph here. You can see the bar charts, which is a one-time maturity snapshot. And there's a coverage grade that we have on there. So you can kind of look at both, we've got a great control, but we're not covering all the assets here. And that's what we need to do going forward. So what we're considering in terms of improving this level is offering commercial tools that measure control maturity at different points in time. There are a lot of tools that do this. And again, you can use our tool and the way we measure it, but there are tools that go into this depending upon your framework. So we're looking maybe at offering those to members in a partnership basis. The other thing is we're looking to move toward the concept of control coverage and control effectiveness, not just maturity, but coverage I've kind of talked about, but the effectiveness is, and that's a SOC 2 Type 2 term, and when it's audited, but where do the operational metrics underlying that actually inform the effectiveness of our controls? So we're looking to automate what you do operationally to come up with a calculation of control maturity. I think it's an ambitious goal. It's something that we're working toward. But again, I think as Arlen and others have said here, if you're going for the first time with the board and you want to have a basis of at least talking about your program, you can use this model and do a control maturity assessment against this CSF and establish a baseline as a way to have inform a discussion with members. So just briefly, I don't know, what are your thoughts about control maturity, and have you seen different models? Is it extremely subjective? Just maybe a couple panelists discuss that for a second.
I don't know that it's extremely subjective. My control model and maturity model is aligned to NIST. I have the 5 NIST dimensions, plus I've added one of my own for program operations. Mm-hmm. So typically you want to see that it's in line with an accepted framework. And that's what, just as contributing my own experience, that's what we do.
Okay, so did you develop your own method, or are you using a tool?
Full disclosure, I came out of the consulting world, so I kind of knew how to do it, so I brought it with me.
Okay, and we're glad you're with us to help us with it.
Thanks.
Okay.
We're an ISO shop, so ISO 27001, but that is a different type of a model. It's more about your program than it is about controls. So right. This gets back to knowing your audience. And I think if you're in front of the board you're going to lose them pretty quick. You start talking about maturity of your program because they're not really interested in that aspect of it. They're more interested in, are we safe? You know, are we good? And so NIST is a very safe framework. It's very well known for most boards. It's familiar. And so I use crosswalks from ISO to 27 to NIST and mapped over those controls to those dimensions, and then measured, did a self measurement of the maturity. Of course, you follow that up at some point with a third party maturity assessment as well, just to validate. But anything that is simple and palatable for the business or for the board to understand is what I would highly recommend. And NIST with those 5 dimensions is fairly easy to communicate.
Great.
And even among those dimensions, lean toward respond and recover, because that's what your board wants to know, right? Not is something going to happen, but when something happens, is your program mature enough and equipped and capable of recovering this business? I think we've gotten past the hoping something never happens stage in life. I think everybody's aware that you're going to have something happen at some point. The board is going to want to know, is it going to materially affect the business or not? That's the kind of information they want to see you put in front of them.
How things have changed in 20 years when the question was, are we secure? How secure?
Right. Anybody who says you're totally secure is lying to you.
Yeah. And
So
how
typically
do you
we
answer
go
that question?
yeah, just don't even go there. We focus on response, recovery, resilience, because that's when the board has to get involved. They don't care how many alerts you got. They don't care how many antivirus detections you had. Can you recover this business in the event of an incident? Is what they care about.
Thank you, Lou, for that. Yeah, there is a saving grace and horizon to being a CISO if you hang in long enough. So thanks. Let me move on to the last top of the pyramid, and this is the risk and compliance metrics, things we talk about in the boardroom. And we had a lot of good discussion around this. Again, we're building this framework out, and we had some examples last time, but now we actually came up with a more formalized 5-guide slide deck. And here's what we recommended, that basically you can see if it's your first presentation or follow-on presentations, and we know all the trepidation of the first presentation, but you want to start with previous meeting requests. If this is your first meeting and you know some topics are the board's interested in advance, good to get a little G2 on it and do that. But one thing that we came up with is make sure you introduce yourself. Talk about your professional background, why you're here, what you're doing it, so that they get to know you. You want to establish a relationship with your board. And I think that was a very important add as we discussed on this. The next piece is talk about the cybersecurity landscape. Make sure that they understand what it's like, what key assets are we protecting. They may know it, but at the first time you may need to remind them. Newsworthy threats, something that is happened in the news, like MOVEit or Log4j that they may have on their minds. Regulations and compliance obligations and business developments. The next thing is enterprise cybersecurity risks, key assets, threats, risk rating, risk reduction efforts. Show, the results, and this has to be shown consistently from one meeting to the next. The fourth is talk about your overall cybersecurity program. Again, show that you're maturing it, that you're working on it, and we'll show a couple of examples of that. And the last thing, to come out of this is turn this around to the opportunities and challenges and solutions that are presented to you as the leader of security and how you're actually meeting some of these things. And if you're not sure you're having them, just look at the AI and the enterprise opportunities and issues that come with it. There's always going to be something. And the board's going to ask you about them. How are you enabling the business while making it secure? Just a few examples that we have here of the deck. And I think to Lou's point on the right, budget sufficiency. Are we allocating sufficient funds to instant response and business recovery? That's a question that board members are getting, and in terms of the what we're seeing in our task forces. Joe, you may want to proceed this also with a 2 or 3 page write-up in advance so that they get to be familiar with these things. And we're actually going to produce a sample of that in the next week to accompany this particular deck. What's our analysis briefly and of what they're asking and what are we doing to answer the question in both cases? Another example is ransomware pay or no pay. You've probably gotten through that question, but here's an example. Keep it simple, bullet points, talk to it, and maybe proceed it with another document to help them understand things. This again, may, I might say there's a lot here, but what I like on the left, and this is our own contribution on the right, we've also gotten from Victor and others, is you want to show that you're maturing your program and that you're moving the needle to the right. So they understand all elements of the program. This is a nice visual. Again, you can kind of have a third party come in and do a baseline for you, or you can do it yourself. At the right, if you want to bring in some KPIs, again, we're not asking you to put graphs together, but one example here is just a simple needle of where we are. And when things are not green, yellow or red, down at the bottom, you might explain briefly, how we're addressing to move the needle to the right. As an example of how you would look at your overall program, and you give the board some confidence that you're improving it, you're measuring it, and you're taking action in this slide. Another thing that you might do, this makes it the 6th slide, actually 6 slides, not 5, but I think this came out of our discussions here, and I think Nick, you were helpful with this. You want to show the board that some independent view of your security program to give them a little more confidence, and not just in terms of what you're saying. And that can be your compliance and audits. In other words, we've met PCI DSS compliance, for example, independent valuations, as we see on the left, maybe talking about pen tests. We're doing those, we're responding to them. We have independent people trying to hack in, and then incidents. We're kind of addressing incidents, and we had this type. We're working on improving certain things there. But the thing I liked about this slide is you can actually show some risk recon ratings, pen tester ratings. If your cyber insurer rates you in terms of that you're lower, if you're SOC 2 type 2 certified, meaning you have independent validation of your controls, or crowd confidence score. These are all public types of things, and it gives your board confidence that you're being looked at outside and what you're saying is credible based upon other people looking at it. Nick, did you want to comment on this a little bit in terms of your experience?
Sure thing, Tom. I would say if on this particular example, and I spent most time explaining the cyber insurance situation because, as you know, cyber insurance that market had hardened. It was more difficult to obtain coverage, and obviously the prices went up significantly. So our board had been paying attention to what it costs. But so beyond the cost, though, there is a lot of hidden benefit here in the assessment of the maturity of your program. Cyber insurance companies on the line to spend a lot of money if your defenses fail. Therefore, they thoroughly look at your information security program, and they also give you a peer ranking. So our board members want to know that we're independently validated and that we do better or worse, hopefully not, than a peer group of organizations. So in that simple metric, you can provide a credible external validation of your information security program, usually based on NIST with maturity rankings and also a peer comparison. So I found that very useful and very interesting to board members.
Because I think it was said before, your board wants to have confidence that you have a viable program, that you're protecting the assets of the company, and that you're managing it well. And this addition to the deck, I think, where you have these kinds of things, gives you more credibility and a way for the board to kind of feel that, yes, it's not just you saying it, but others have gone and looked at your program and this is how we're dealing with things. The last slide, again, is to turn this around. What opportunities are being presented to the business? You might think of them more as challenges, but have a business mindset to the board as well. And how are we addressing those challenges? So I think right now, anyone who's going to give a board presentation, and I encourage all the CISOs here to join us in our AI task group, which is going to start in mid-July. You're going to be asked about this, and what are the security concerns, protecting data, integrity of the results. So how are we going to do it? We're going to put a policy together, a governance structure, and develop an actual safe AI environment to allow our business to actually use this incredible technology. As an example, another area would be customer prospects. They're demanding we have security certifications. Way to do it is we're going to go undertake a SOC 2 Type 2 audit. So when we go and bid on projects and they ask us about our security program, we can show that we've been certified, and that gives us a leg up. In fact, I've seen that in doing a lot of third-party audits, that definitely will give you a leg up, or ISO certification. Or another example is business acquisitions. What's the opportunity? You want to acquire businesses, but we bring in their security vulnerabilities. So how are we going to handle that? So in terms of our next steps, we want to develop a 2-page summary template. We're going to have that in the next couple of weeks and continue to develop visual options. Let me just ask the panel very briefly. We do have the CISO's quick guide to the boardroom. NACD has a lot of great guidance, for very detailed, but in 12 pages, we've given you a good start. The last 2 questions are, when might you show graphs of operational metrics at board meetings, if ever? Maybe this has already been answered, but if you were ever to show a graph, what guidance would you give on how it is represented and used? So anyone want to comment on that? You might, I'm not trying to say no to this, but is there any time that you might show an operational metrics graph to the board?
I'm waiting for the first person to say no.
I mean, you can say no.
We can all say it at the same time. I generally wouldn't.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Listen, you never say never. However, boy, that'll be a rare moment.
I've seen people put up phishing statistics.
I understand. I understand. Listen, the one caveat I'll say to that, pardon me, Tom, for the interruption. Sure. No. And I have gotten into this conversation with CISOs, Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies, that their boards have asked for specific operational metrics. The board asks, you give. It's quite straightforward. However, that's not something that I would necessarily volunteer.
Good point. I think everyone's echoing that pretty much. I would say if you're asked to show something in terms of what guidance, again, don't volunteer, but if you're asked to do something, just some basics, make sure that the graph is intuitively understood, right? And
to that, pardon my interruption again here real quick, but to that, these individuals, it's processed data versus raw data. And I appreciate a graph is somewhat processed, but to understand what that graph means or what these metrics means requires that you have a particular understanding and perspective of not only the data, but what it means to a program. That's a lot of interpretation. That's a lot of explaining. And quite often, these non-technical individuals, either A, they and you don't have the time. You typically have 15 minutes every quarter in your board sessions. You don't have time to go into really driving into the significance of what this thing means. And even if you do get that time, you're spending a lot of time in that, once again, 15 minutes every quarter. You're spending a lot of that 15 minutes to speak about something which in isolation is generally meaningless.
Yeah.
So that's clearly I'm getting on a horse here. So I'll jump off the horse and let others speak.
No. I think we kind of got the message here. So in other words, don't take the operational metrics that we've shown here and then throw it in front of your board. I think most people
No, sir.
get that. But on the other hand, use them to improve your program with your working groups. So thank you, everyone, with that. Let me just kind of move on. The poll questions are being delivered here. Developing and using security metrics is a continuous journey. I'm going to reiterate what everyone says. Make sure you know your audience through that journey, and you're providing information and metrics that they'll use and inform them. So that's kind of the key message here. We have a standing security metrics task force. This is going on to the end of the year, every other week. We'll probably continue on beyond that as all of us work together to develop our individual programs and our collective knowledge that we're sharing here today. We are continuing to develop this 3-tiered framework because it resonates with the security team, with management, and with the board. Not everything is all synced up. We've learned that. Sometimes you have to start at the top and then work down to the operational metrics. But that's a better place to start, but you can build out the operational metrics if you're doing that. And that's begin to start small in that regard with a few metrics reviewed by stakeholders with actions to meet an objective. That works very, very well at the operational side, but you can't do it right away with 40 metrics. We hope you will join the task force to help you develop your program with experiential guidance from your peers. Again, when you come to the task force, if you have an immediate need or issue, let's say you're going to meet with the board, and I think members on here know that, that becomes an immediate topic of conversation. Members help you and inform you, and you can obviously have a sounding base as well. Just in terms of final things here, the task forces that we're planning, we are planning an AI working group. I just want to make sure members understand that. It's going to be led by Kevin Warson of CISO driven brands. It will run for at least 5 sessions, I imagine more. And what we're going to be looking at is AI business demand use cases across multiple industries. So we'll have a large team from different industries involved in this. Offerings in the marketplace, what are Google and others actually doing? So we'll get a good idea of the demand and what's being offered. And then we're going to talk about how do you put a governance process in to manage this in your businesses without just simply saying go. Everyone's all over the map on this in terms of what we've done so far, and we want to talk more about that. Come up with an acceptable use policy for that. Look at security and architectural requirements as you're going forward, and consider how you might establish a safe AI operating environment. And again, there are different types of AI, and that's what we want to do is understand those and where we might apply them. Again, we have other teams, vulnerability management team, identity access management team kicking off. The challenging role of the CISO and the BISO for a lot of people, and OT security is coming up in November, and then we're considering some other things as well. We have a number of key content additions here, a good robust library, and over 100 recorded webinars for CVE credits. So this is in the deck, and you can kind of look through it. What I'd like to do now is maybe let's look at some of the chat questions. We have probably about 5 more minutes. Let's see what we have here. Oh no, Q&A. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong area. First one, can you see the first question? Attending a meeting where it was indicated that the SEC is planning to implement cybersecurity requirements for the boards of public companies. Is anyone aware of these SEC requirements? and when the SEC is planning to implement them. We have some guidance on that, Edmundo. You'll see a name to come up with, and I'm sure we can send you that. Yes, there is guidance on this, and what they're looking at is, especially the way you're dealing with risk, incident management, and also your board member composition a little bit. So anyway, we do have a 2-page guidance on that.
I'd like to make a comment on that too.
Sure.
For the CISOs out there that are trying to learn their audience and try to guess what the board's looking for. Or not sure how successful you are, but this is a gift to us.
Yeah.
You have someone on the board that's going to be designated as, for cybersecurity oversight. You have an opportunity now to make a connection directly with a board member and have offline, out of cycle dialogue and what they're interested in and what they would like to see in the updates. And you got a direct funnel now to an opportunity to get that established. We haven't had that before. It's been more of a finance driven, operational driven board for most. So I took that approach here at Ingevity, and it was very well welcomed, and I was able to speak to one of our board members that's designated and provided some valuable insight.
I think that's good. You have an ally on the board that speaks your language. And
You'll get better questions, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And this is going to do for CISOs what SOX did for CFOs. Jody's exactly right. Some of us may even become those board members.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very good point. Well, now you have an ally, and you might put that operational metric up yet. I mean, I'm just kidding. I don't think so. Thank you for that. Here's another.
Those are fighting words, Tom.
Yeah, no. I lost that battle a long time ago. I've seen it where it's gone awry. So I agree with it. In terms of metrics development, how many people typically support this effort? We are running fairly lean. Yeah.
If I can answer that one, appreciate especially the lean comment. Let me reorient slightly. The fundamental role of a CISO is a risk manager. We do that within the context of a highly technical environment, examining highly technical questions, but we're fundamentally risk managers. And as risk managers, if you're not already, and it's difficult for a lot of people to make that mental switch in their head, because most of us, many of us perhaps, came out of technology or engineering. We have that background, we have that skill set, we've been trained and we've come out of that world. But engineering and technology is different than risk and risk management and enterprise risk management. It requires an additional leadership capability skill as a CISO and director level to be able to think in this way and to organize how you're presenting information and driving your program using metrics. So in that regard, even fairly lean organizations ought to be thinking in terms of risk and how do you measure, quantify, and communicate cybersecurity risk within your environment.
Yeah, start there with a small team. As I said, I've seen someone build out a whole operational base, quite robust, from taking vulnerability statistics and coming up with graphs. It was $1 to $2 million effort with 5 or 6 people. But it was a very large organization, and they were willing to take the risk to do that and found value in helping to manage it. But it was a long journey. And if you have to try to do that versus doing what Arlen says, communicate risk and what's needed for your senior management or board, if you do that and it distracts you from your other job, you can be in a world of hurt, I guess. So keep that perspective. But I've seen 5 or 6 on it, in large organizations, just as a number. But it's hard to recommend the specific number. Show operational metrics if it controls efficacy using question. Oh, I see. Yeah, they say, yeah, that's a good William. Thank you for that. Yes, phishing metrics to give a measure of your training awareness effectiveness. We've seen that. Some people have put that out on the board when ransomware was, really, it still is, but at the floor, to show that we're training people, and that was fine. What you don't want to do is get into, in some of the graphs here, you have 5 or 6 lines on the graph and you're trying to explain them all to make your point. If the board wants that and they're asking for it, and you want to show it, make sure they understand the message as soon as they see the graph, and you're not explaining it. Otherwise, you're going to get into a big thing. AI use framework. AI use framework or control is challenging since these are popping up all over different open sources. Yeah, Rick, join our AI task force. Maybe we'll figure it out. Any other questions? I think we've come to the top of the questions. All right, let me just get to the last slide here. Yeah, we're right at the top of the hour. Thank you, everyone. Look, I want to thank my panelists here who've kept me honest, but they've kept all of us honest in the working groups. We have open discussions. We're all under NDA. We're here to help each other. We all need to advance in this area. We're under a lot of requirements and pressure given the environment out there. So please join us. Again, members will be posting materials over the next couple of weeks. Yes, please contact Tom Ward at this address for a copy of this presentation. We'll give you some good ideas and some other value that come out of here. You've all answered the poll questions. We want to thank you for your time this afternoon. Have a great 4th of July weekend, and keep your chin up and keep fighting. Thanks, everyone.